Salvete omnes, this is lecture 29.5. On the agenda for this lecture, we will be reviewing the Cicero translation. I am asking that you post corrections on eCollege, at the very least for part 3 of the translation, but you are, of course, welcome to post corrections of the entire passage. I will be reviewing the entire passage in this lecture, but you are, at the very least, required to submit your corrections for part 3. All right, the character of Catiline's followers. Looking at the first sentence, which again we have already reviewed, but why for so long, okay, sed cur tam diu, but why for so long? And again, really focus on this idea as we talked about with these rules for reading Latin. Looking at the original Latin word order, thinking about the words as they come, and what are the different expectations that you can have about those words. Why do we speak for so long about one enemy? So, sed cur tam diu. Why for so long? Now I have a prepositional phrase. I know that de anticipates an ablative, and so uno there, modifying hoste. Why do we speak? Now I've got my subject. So why for so long about one enemy we speak? And, all right, comma. Now I know that I am probably going to be getting a whole new subject, a new verb, because of a comma plus the word et. Then I have a prepositional phrase. I know that eo can either function as a pronoun or it can function as an adjective. When it functions as an adjective, it comes before the noun it modifies. So de eo hoste, all right? Now I get to the word qui. When I get to the word qui, I should be looking for a relative clause. Remember that a relative clause is going to start with the relative pronoun, and then it is going to go up to the very first verb that you come to. Okay, so about that enemy, who now says, now I have an indirect statement. The verb dicit will trigger an indirect statement. When I have an indirect statement, what I want to look for immediately after that verb of thinking or saying or feeling, sensing, knowing, perceiving is an accusative subject. Say here is my accusative subject. Then I'm going to be looking for an infinitive. And then here I have the word hostem. Hostem technically, to make life complicated, is a predicate nominative, but it's not really a predicate nominative because it's in the accusative case. So it's a predicate accusative subject, which is confusing, I know. This is all because of the verb esse, which is a linking verb. All right. Who now says that? He himself, right? So that say is the reflexive. It's referring back to the subject of the verb of speaking. Who now says that he himself is an enemy and, okay, I've got another comma and the word et. So again, I should be expecting a change in verb, possibly a change in subject. And quem. Now I have a relative pronoun in the accusative case, all right? And whom, all right? I can pretty much make that assumption because I know that it's accusative singular. And whom. Then I come to a comma, and then I have the word quod, and as I put in my notes, quod here means because. This is set off in commas, so pretty good bet it is its own phrase, and it has its own verb, right? So because a wall is between, because there is a wall between us, non timeo. Now I have my main verb, and now I know that quem is the direct object of that next main verb, and whom I do not fear. Why for so long do we speak about one enemy, and about that enemy, who now says that he is an enemy, and whom, because there is a wall between, I do not fear. So dicimus, first plural present indicative active, the subject of the verb is we. Hoste is an ablative singular masculine. It's just an oop, not any more complicated than that with the preposition de. Qui, masculine singular nominative, the antecedent is hostis. Se esse hostem is indirect statement. The verb that triggers it is dicit, a verb of speaking. Quem, accusative singular masculine. It is the direct object of the verb timeo. And then timeo there, a first singular present indicative active. Dehis, qui in media urbe, qui nobiscum sunt nihil dicimus. Okay. Again, I've got the preposition de, so de his, right? And to look back, we're still kind of working in the same sentence, remember? So about all of these, right? So about Catiline, we keep talking, right? And about that guy who says that he's an enemy, dehis. But about these guys, dehis, about these men, relative clause, all right? Note that it is set off in commas, okay? Qui, who, prepositional phrase, in the middle of the city. And now I just have repetition. Qui, who, with us, and then I have a verb. I'm actually going to supply the verb twice. So sun is going to work in its own little relative clause, and then it's also going to work in the previous relative clause. So about these men who are in the middle of the city, who are with us, we say nothing. So nihil, remember that nihil is a noun, so it's my direct object. Qui, nominative plural masculine, because it refers back to his. Nobis is an ablative plural, and it's an ablative of accompaniment, right, with that cum attached to it. So we're saying all of this stuff about Catiline, and we keep talking about Catiline, and Cicero's like, why are we talking about Catiline? Catiline says that he's an enemy. He recognizes that he is an enemy. What we should really be worried about are these people who are actually in the city and among us, right? Catiline is kicked out of the city. There was a wall between us. I'm not worried about Catiline anymore. I am concerned about these guys that are right now with us, living with us. Exponam enem vobis o cives genera hominum ex quibus istae copiae perantur. I start off with a main verb, which is always very handy, exponam. I shall demonstrate. I will explain. Future. For I will explain, vobis, nice dative indirect object, so I will explain to you all. Vocative, O citizens. Genera. All right, I know that genera is not nominative, neuter plural. It has to be accusative neuter plural because I already have my subject. So I will explain to you all. What am I going to explain? Well, I'm going to explain the direct object. I'm going to explain the kinds. Whenever you see genus, you should always look for a genitive after it because usually you're going to have kinds of something. So I will explain to you all the kinds of men. Now I have X. I know that X anticipates an ablative from which, okay, istai. Now, istai could be a lot of things, right? This is where I'm going to need to look more at the grammar of the sentence and the words following it to figure out what's going on. I at least know to anticipate a noun after it, that it modifies, because demonstratives come before the noun. Istai copiae, these troops, and then I come to perantur. Okay, now I see that perantur is third plural and that it's passive. So that's telling me that perantur, the subject of it, is going to be istai copiae. So the types of men from which that army is being prepared. I will demonstrate for you, O citizens, the types of men from which that army is being prepared. Unum genus est eorum qui. And again, I translated this one for you guys. So one kind, right? And now he's talking about all the different groups of men from which Catiline got all of his followers. So one kind is kind of understood, made up of those men who. Okay, now I come to a relative clause. So qui is going to open up a relative clause. I'm going to take that relative clause all the way down to my first verb, habet. Okay, so qui magno in aere. Now I have an ablative adjective, and I have an adjective of size, quantity, right? When I know that's going to come before the noun, it modifies. Note that it comes before the preposition in. That's all right. Oftentimes we will have a preposition coming between the noun and the adjective. We're totally okay with that. We see this all the time with cum. So I just bounce right up to the next noun, and there it is, aere. And then alieno, okay, well that adjective is going to come after aere because it denotes a sort of quality of that noun. So in great debt. Magnas has to be accusative plural, so it's going to have to be a direct object. When I come to my next word, well, that's not a direct object, that's just the word etiam. So I'm going to keep looking for a direct object, and there it is. And then I have my main verb, haben. So one kind is made up of those who in great debt still have great possessions. Quadum. All right, I know that quadum is going to be not an ablative plural. Apologies there. It's going to be a genitive plural. So quadum is a genitive plural relative pronoun, and I know that I can just kind of loosely translate it as of which. Then I come to the word amore. I know that amore is an ablative. So it might be something along the lines of by love, for love, something like that. It's going to be some kind of an ablative of means. Then I get to adducti, okay? And adducti, perfect passive participle. So induced by love of which, and that quadum refers back to the possessiones. Remember that a relative pronoun will always have an antecedent. So whenever you come across a relative pronoun, you should immediately think about what is the antecedent of this pronoun. It makes translating it a lot easier. So by love of which they are induced. Then I come to dissolvi. Dissolvi is a present passive infinitive, and I'm not quite sure yet why I have an infinitive, so I want to keep translating. Nullo, all right, that's a size quantity adjective. It's going to be modifying molto. I don't have a preposition, but I have an ablative, so probably going to be an ablative of means. And then I get possunt. Once I see possunt, I know to look for a complementary infinitive. And that's what's going on with dissolvi. Induced by love of which they are able to be freed, okay, passive infinitive, in no way, by no manner, okay, nullo modo, in no way. So note there that dissolvi is a complementary infinitive. We now have two uses of the infinitive. We have complementary infinitives, and then we have indirect statement, also known as oratio obliqua, OO. Sed hos homines non puto temendos, supply an essay, quod deduci de sententia sua possunt. All right, sed hos. Okay, that's a demonstrative pronoun. It's going to come before the noun it modifies. These men is either going to be, well, it can't be my subject because hos is screaming accusative, right? So I've got a direct object. But those men non puto. All right, I do not think. So I do not think those men. And then I come to temendos. Okay, well, temendos is a future passive participle. I know because of that nd hanging out there, telling me that this is a gerundive. And then I've got that essay. And what that essay is telling me is I have an indirect statement here. Right? Because I have the verb puto. And I know that verbs of thinking can take an indirect statement. So I do not think that hos homines is an accusative subject in indirect statement, okay? So I do not think that these men, and then temendos, right, with sum, it's a passive periphrastic. It just happens to be a passive periphrastic in an indirect statement. So tricky, but it's fine, right? It just means that instead of using a conjugated form of the verb to be, okay, so instead of putting something like sunt, I'm just going to use the infinitive. Not a problem. Because, again, I'm in indirect statement, and in indirect statement, we use infinitives. Okay. Quod, translating here, is because. Because, deduci, right? I already know what deduci means, right? To be led, right? Because, to be led, I'm not quite sure why I have an infinitive yet. De, I know takes the ablative. De sententia, so from their opinion. Again, makes sense that I'm going to have de sententia following deduci. And then I've got possunt again. So I know that once again, I just have a complementary infinitive. Because they are able to be led away from their own opinion. So what Cicero is basically saying is, I'm not worried about these guys who are in debt but still want to have a lot of possessions, and there's no way they're going to get out of debt because these are very shallow, vain people, and it's pretty easy to convince them otherwise of what they're already thinking. So I'm not worried about these guys that have joined with Catiline. Alterum genus est eonum qui. Okay, I've got that same construction that I saw before, so Cicero loves repetition. So another kind is kind of made up of those who, relative clause, so that qui is going to go all the way down to the expectant, who, note that this is set off by commas, so I know to translate all of these words together as their own little phrase, although passive verb, they are pressed upon aide aliano by debt, ablative of means. Then I come to imperium. I know that imperium is going to need to be my direct object because I already have a subject. Power, nevertheless, they expect. And not only are they expecting power, but they're also expecting atque honores, and honors quos. Quos I know is an accusative plural, so it's going to just translate as which. Then I come to re publica perturbata. It is set off by commas. It is in the ablative case, and I have a perfect passive participle, so here I have a very nice ablative absolute. Just note that it is passive, all right? So it's not that these men are trying to disturb the Republic. It is with the Republic having been disrupted, okay? So honors which, with the Republic having been disrupted, consueque, right, meaning to obtain, themselves, to be able, they think, haha. Okay, that puto is telling me that I now have an indirect statement. Se is my accusative subject, posse is my infinitive in an indirect statement. So they think that they themselves are able, and then I have the complementary infinitive, to obtain quos which things. Another kind is made up of those who, although they are pressed by debt, nevertheless they expect power and honors which, with the Republic having been disrupted, they think they are able to obtain. So aere there, an ablative of means. Quos, accusative plural masculine, the antecedent is both imperium and honores. Republica perturbata is an ablative absolute. And then se posse is an example of indirect statement. Quibus hac non sperandum est. This must not be hoped for by these men, right? So the quibus actually refers back to the guys in the previous sentence. So by whom this ought not be hoped for, all right? Quibus is a dative plural masculine. It's a dative of agent with a passive periphrastic. So hoc is the subject, sperandum est, passive periphrastic, quibus, dative of agent. Nom illis hac intelligendum est primum omnium me ipsum vigilare adesse providere rei publicae. All right. 4. Illis. I'm not quite sure how to translate the ilias. Hac, I know, can either be a subject or an accusative. Intelligendum. Whenever I see a future passive participle, I want to look for the verb to be, to see if I have a passive periphrastic, which I do. I have a singular passive periphrastic. I know that my subject is neuter, so hac is the subject, so this must be understood, and then illis now I can supply as a dative of agent. This must be understood by them. Primum. All right, we're going to get a list. First of all right, primum omnium. First of all, now we have an indirect statement following that intelligendum est, right? This must be understood by all of them. Namely that, right? Now I'm going to have a string of accusative subject, infinitive, 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 right? So first of all, that I myself am vigilant, that I am present, and that I am looking out for the Republic. Deende, right? First of all, now I have another word that's helping me order and rank these things. Secondly, it needs to be understood that. Now I have a new accusative subject, okay? Magnos, animos, here's my infinitive, and then I have a prepositional phrase. So second of all, that there is great courage in good men. They also need to know that there is a great agreement of the orders. This meaning like the different ranks, the different classes of men within the Senate and also in Roman kind of upper class society. That there's an agreement among everybody. That there is the greatest number of people, right? We've got a lot of numbers on our side. And then finally, that there is a great number, great troops of soldiers. So militum there, a genitive plural. Finally, all right, denique. Finally, they need to understand that. I'm still an indirect statement. Deos immortales, accusative subject. The immortal gods, huic invicto populo. All right, that's a dative. I'm not quite sure why I have a dative yet, but let's figure out. Claudo imperio. That might be another dative. Pulchrae urbi, it's another dative. Then I have prepositional phrase. I've got a genitive. Genitives usually follow the noun that they modify, or you can translate them with. Auxilium, that might be my accusative direct object. Hey, look, there's my infinitive finally. Oh, and it's an infinitive linked to datorus, so here I have a future infinitive. So, it must be understood that, finally, the immortal gods, not just any gods, but the immortal gods will give help to this unconquered nation, to this distinguished power, to the beautiful city, against such a force of wickedness. So, intelligendum est, this is a passive periphrastic. The subject is hoc. Illis, dative plural masculine, it's a dative of agent. Popolo, dative singular masculine, it's an indirect object. Huic just simply modifies popolo. Imperio, another dative singular, it's neuter, it's another indirect object. Urbi, another dative singular feminine, indirect object. Wem, accusative singular feminine, direct object. And then skeletis is a genitive singular neuter. Do these men hope that? All right. So Noum introducing this question, usually of incredulity. Illi, it's probably my subject, it's coming first. Those men, in Cinere, in the ash, and then I have a genitive, in the ash of the city. I'm going to have a repetition parallel. In the blood of the citizens. Okay, say. Okay, so I have an accusative, which I should think about. I've got consules aut dictatores, probably an accusative, aut etiam rege. So I know that this is sort of all together because they're strung together by the outs. And then I have the verb spero, and I know that spero will often introduce indirect statement, which would help to make sense of things, because now I have a future infinitive and I have an accusative subject. Do these men hope that in the ash of the city and in the blood of the citizens that they themselves, right, will be consuls or dictators or even kings? Cinere, it's an ablative singular masculine, ablative of place where. Quium, a genitive genitive plural. Se futurus esse, that is indirect statement after the verb sperant. Reges, it's an accusative plural masculine. This is another example of that predicate accusative subject after the verb to be. Right? Do they hope that they will be? So it's not a direct object. The verb to be doesn't take a direct object. All right. Instead, it is this predicate accusative subject. All right. This is what you translated. This is very impressive. This is your pat on the back moment, all right? So this is the entire passage. Why for so long do we speak about one enemy and about that enemy who now says that he is an enemy and whom, because there is a wall between, I do not fear? About these men who are in the middle of the city who are with us, we say nothing. For I will demonstrate for you, O citizens, the types of men from which that army is being prepared. One kind is made up of those who in great debt still have great possessions, induced by love of which they are able to be freed from debt in no way. But I do not think that these men ought to be feared, because they are able to be led away from their own opinion. Another kind is made up of those who, although they are pressed by debt, nevertheless they expect power and honors which, with the republic having been disrupted, they think that they are able to obtain. This must not be hoped for by these men. And this must be understood by them. First of all, that I am vigilant, I am present, and I am looking out for the republic. Second, that great minds, there's courage, and good men, that there's a great agreement of the orders, the greatest multitude, and great troops of soldiers. Finally, that the gods will give help to this unconquered nation, to this distinguished power, to the beautiful city against such a fork of what's in this. Do those men hope that in the ash of the city and in the blood of the citizens that they themselves will be consuls or dictators or even, say it ain't so, kings? All right, everybody. Well, very good job with the Cicero. Again, please post your corrections in the Dropbox that says Corrected Cicero on eCollege and continue to have good luck with that midterm. Walite.